This is Maurice Harris. Police say the teen, who is no stranger to law enforcement, gunned down 4 people near 75th and Coles last week. The reason? Police say it appears to be retaliation for his father's murder a day earlier.
This is Maurice Harris, who was accused of committing a quadruple murder out of revenge for his slain father. He spent a total of 3 years in pre-trial detention and ultimately managed to win the case. Maurice Harris is the cousin of G Herbo. I'm sure some of you have heard of him before. Additionally, Maurice Harris is a rapper himself and releases music under the artist name Drench Music. His most well-known nicknames are Lil Wet or NLMB WET M Up. He is part of NLMB, which is a gang from the east side of Chicago. They are among the largest gangs in the city simply because many small gangs have joined forces to form No Limit or NLMB. The story of NLMB WET is incredibly sad, tragic, and messed up at the same time. It was March 29, 2017 when Jerry Jacobs, also known as Big Wet, was casually walking through Chicago. Big Wet was Lil Wet's father and was also part of NLMB, just like his son. As Big Wet walked on the sidewalk, a car suddenly pulled up next to him, from which 4 masked men emerged and opened fire directly at him, even though Big Wet has even tried to run away from it, but was hit by a barrage of bullets. He managed to survive initially and get himself to the hospital, but unfortunately it was futile as he was declared dead in the hospital just a few hours later. He was only 37 years old and the perpetrators were never caught. Big Wet himself is said to have not been a clean slate, as he had already been accused of 2 murders himself. He even stood trial for it, but was never convicted of murder. Nevertheless, this shows that the investigators see him as an active gang member. Not even 12 hours after Big Wet's death, an incredibly brutal crime occurred. Approximately a mile away from the crime scene where Big Wet was shot,
Jacobs was shot to death a day before the quadruple homicide happened near 75th and Coles.
A shooting occurred at a restaurant. 4 men were standing in front of a Nadia fish and chicken store when an armed man approached them and the attacker immediately opened fire. The first victim was found dead in the parking lot. The second victim was approximately a mile away, most likely caught while trying to flee. These 2 victims were brothers who were visiting their mother, who worked at this restaurant. In total, 4 men died at once, including 2 brothers. The grandmother was also present at the scene. Unfortunately, there is an incredibly heart-wrenching interview where the grandmother starts crying. One can't even imagine how terrible it must be to see your own flesh and blood lying on the ground, motionless as a grandmother and mother.
They just laying there on the street. They've been out here for almost 4 hours. 4 hours, how do you lay a kid on the ground?
This just shows that this whole street life leads to nothing. It's not a cool life. Real people die there. Regardless of the perpetrator's background, this act was inhumane and brutal. There is nothing else to say about it. The suspected perpetrator was identified by witnesses at the scene and was said to be Big Wet's son, Lil Wet. The police were reportedly very confident about this identification at that time because they publicly claimed that Lil Wet was the perpetrator and his motive was indeed this murder of Big Wet.
I don't have the motive for why Jerry Jacobs was killed, but I mean, it's a reasonable belief. Jerry Jacobs is murdered, then 24 hours later, his own son goes and kills 4 people. So obviously, those 2 incidents are related.
Although it was never confirmed that these 4 boys had anything to do with his father's murder. Lil Wet was 19 years old at the time and had already had some trouble with the police in the past as a teenager, especially due to illegal possession of weapons. He was accused of committing these 4 murders alone, which made bail virtually impossible. As a result, he spent a total of 3 years in pre-trial detention. Everyone thought he was definitely guilty and would be sentenced to life imprisonment. However, this did not turn out to be true because Lil Wet won this case. The witness statements identifying Lil Wet as the shooter on site were officially deemed inadmissible. It turned out that no one wanted to testify against Lil Wet. There was even a situation where a witness was shown several pictures, one of which was Lil Wet's picture, and the witness pointed to Lil Wet. There were actually many witnesses, but suddenly no one testified anymore. No testimony held any value anymore, and things went very well for Lil Wet because there was no evidence against him, not even proof that he was present at the scene, so he could not be proven guilty of committing the murder. Officially, however, he is not innocent either. the whole case ended in a mistrial, and thus the murderer of these 4 boys was never convicted. However, it must also be said that the police officers on site did an incredibly poor job. In an interview, the grandmother mentioned having witnessed her grandsons lying on the ground without being covered for several hours, meaning all passers-by saw these boys dead on the ground. Furthermore, the blood in the store was not cleaned up by the police. Instead, it had to be done by employees, which is not really nice considering that forensic work needed to be done. Unfortunately, this seems to be everyday life in Chicago. It confirms an image where police seem to have abandoned residents in suburban areas. It seems like they just don't care about 4 people dying here. We will probably never find out if Lil Wet was indeed the shooter or not. His defense allegedly had evidence that he wasn't guilty. However, it's normal for any defense team to try to get their client acquitted. After his exoneration as not being the shooter officially, he now lives a good life without any fear of existence, since his cousin G Herbo is a multi-millionaire through his rap music reaching many people. For this reason, Lil Wet later started releasing his own music, which has been well received. However, he seems unable to stay out of trouble because just about a month ago he was caught by police with a weapon equipped with a switch, which means automatic firing capability, resulting in much harsher penalties compared to being caught with a regular weapon. This could potentially lead Lil Wet to serve up to 10 years in prison. However, it will likely end up being 3 to 5 years. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Leave a comment if you want to support me. Remember guys, I ask you all to maintain respect in your comments. There is no place in my community for anyone making fun of deceased individuals. Leave a rating and subscribe if you like this video. See you next time guys. Bye.